The cemetery grass felt cold through my stockings. I knelt there beside the freshly turned earth, my knees sinking into the damp soil, and nobody came to help me stand. The funeral director had packed up 30 minutes ago. The caterers had left 20 minutes before that. Even the pastor was gone now, his black sedan disappearing around the bend of the cemetery road. I was alone. 53 years of marriage, and I stood alone at my husband's grave. My name is Miriam Caldwell. I'm 71 years old, and 3 days ago I became a widow when my husband Frederick collapsed in our kitchen while I was upstairs folding his shirts. The EMTs said he died instantly. Massive heart attack. Nothing anyone could have done. But that's not the worst part of the story. The worst part is learning who shows up when you need them most and who doesn't. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. The wind picked up, scattering dead leaves across Frederick's grave. I pulled my black coat tighter and tried to stand, my arthritic knees, screaming in protest. That's when I heard the car door slam. 2 of them, one right after the other, like gunshots in the quiet afternoon. I turned. My son Trevor stood beside his silver Mercedes, straightening his tie. His wife, Sienna, climbed out from the passenger side, her black prod probably costing more than most people's monthly mortgage. They'd been here for the service, late, of course, sitting in the second row instead of beside me. But I thought they'd left with everyone else. I was wrong. They walked toward me with purpose, not the slow, respectful pace of mourners, the quick, determined stride of people on a mission. Mom. Trevor's voice had that edge to it. The one he used when he wanted something. We need to talk. I pressed my palm against Frederick's temporary marker. The metal felt cold. Final. Your father just. My voice cracked. Can't this wait? No. Sienna stopped 3 feet away, far enough that she wouldn't have to touch me. Close enough that I could see her perfectly applied makeup hadn't smudged once during the service. It really can't. Trevor pulled out his phone right there. Standing over his father's fresh grave, he pulled out his phone and started scrolling. Dad's lawyer keeps dodging calls. Sienna's father has been trying to reach him all week. We need access to the accounts by Friday. Friday, 4 days away. The dirt on Frederick's grave hadn't even settled yet. There are investment opportunities, Sienna added, her tone the same one she'd used to discuss the weather. Time-sensitive ones with 50 million in assets. We could triple that within 6 months. But we need to move now. 50 million. They'd calculated it down to the penny. Probably had been calculating for years, watching the business grow, watching Frederick's investments multiply, watching and waiting for this exact moment. My legs felt weak. The will reading is next week. That's too long. Trevor stepped closer, put his hand on my shoulder. His fingers felt cold even through my coat. Mom, I know you're grieving, but Dad would want us to be smart about this. He'd want his money to grow to benefit the whole family. He squeezed my shoulder, his voice dropping to that patronizing tone that made my stomach turn. You don't understand these things like we do. Financial planning, investment strategies. Let us handle all that. You just focus on healing. Let them handle it like I was senile. Like 53 years of marriage to a successful businessman had taught me nothing. Like I hadn't been there for every decision, every risk, every triumph. I stepped back out of Trevor's reach. Something cold and hard settled in my chest. Something that felt almost like clarity. The will reading is Tuesday, I said quietly. 10 a.m. at Frederick's lawyer's office. You'll learn everything then. Sienna's face hardened. The false sympathy vanished like smoke. This is ridiculous. You're being deliberately difficult. I'm following my husband's wishes. Your husband is dead. The words came out sharp, cruel. Then Sienna caught herself softening her voice into something that might have passed for gentle if you didn't look at her eyes. I'm sorry that came out wrong. I just mean you need to think about your future. About Delilah and Mason. About family. Family? The word stuck in my throat like broken glass. Trevor's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, typed a quick response, looked back at me. "We're trying to help you, Mom. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." They left without saying goodbye. Sienna's heels clicked against the cemetery path. Trevor's Mercedes roared to life, tires squealing slightly as he accelerated out of the parking lot. I stood there watching their tail lights disappear, my hand still pressed against Frederick's grave marker. And that cold, hard feeling in my chest grew stronger because suddenly I remembered something. A letter. An envelope Frederick's lawyer had given me yesterday pressed into my hands with gentle insistence. From Frederick, Mr. Castellanos had said he wanted you to have this after the funeral. Open it when you're ready. I tucked it in my purse without looking at it, too numb to process anything beyond putting one foot in front of the other. But now, standing in the empty cemetery with the echo of my son's greed still hanging in the air, I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope. It was sealed with red wax. Frederick's initials pressed into it, and across the front, in his familiar handwriting, "For Miriam, open when you're ready." My hands started to shake. I drove home in a fog. Frederick's envelope sitting on the passenger seat like a living thing. Our house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, the same house we'd moved into 30 years ago when the business finally took off. Frederick had carried me over the threshold, even though we'd been married 23 years by then. "New house, new beginning," he'd said, laughing at his own sentimentality. Now it was just a house, empty, hollow. His coffee mug still sat in the sink from 3 days ago. I'd been too scared to touch it, like washing it away would erase him completely. His reading glasses rested on the side table next to his chair, his slippers by the bed, positioned exactly as he'd left them, waiting for feet that would never fill them again. I made chamomile tea with trembling hands, and sat in Frederick's chair. The leather still held the impression of his body. I could almost feel him there, watching me, waiting. The envelope felt heavy, heavier than paper should feel. I broke the wax seal and pulled out 3 pages covered in Frederick's careful handwriting. My vision blurred immediately, but I blinked the tears back and started reading. "My dearest Miriam, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer. I'm sorry for every morning I won't wake up beside you. Every sunset we won't watch together from the porch. I'm sorry I won't be there to hold your hand through whatever comes next. But I'm not sorry for what I've done with our estate. You know it as well as I do. Trevor stopped being our son years ago. He became something else, someone else. We tried to raise him, right? We sacrificed everything to give him opportunities we never had. But somewhere along the way, money and status became more important to him than love and loyalty. Son, then basic human decency. I've watched him treat you like an inconvenience. I've watched him measure our worth in dollars instead of years. I've watched him circle like a vulture, waiting for exactly this moment. Do you remember what he said to me when I refused to invest in Sienna's father's scheme? He told me I was a selfish old man holding on to money that belonged to the family. Belonged to the family as if 50 years of work, of sacrifice, of building something from nothing belonged to him by right of birth. That was when I really knew. So, I made arrangements, changes, plans that I kept from you because I needed you to be genuinely surprised when the time came. I needed your reactions to be real, Miriam. I needed Trevor and Sienna to see your face and know you had no part in what I'd done. What have I done? You'll find out Tuesday at the will reading. And my love, when you do, I need you to remember something important. The best revenge isn't hatred. It's not anger or violence or dramatic confrontation. The best revenge is giving people exactly what they deserve and watching them destroy themselves trying to fight it. Trevor wants our money. He'll get exactly what his love is worth. Exactly what his years of neglect and cruelty and calculated indifference have earned him. Everything I did was for you. Every hour I worked, every risk I took, every decision I made, all of it was to make sure you'd be taken care of. To make sure that when I was gone, you'd have security, comfort, and peace. Trust me, my love. Trust the plan. And when Tuesday comes, when that will is read and Trevor's true face shows itself completely, remember, you owe him nothing. Not your money, not your grief. Not one more ounce of the love you've wasted on someone who stopped deserving it years ago. I love you. I've always loved you. From that church social in 1972 until my last breath, you were the only thing that mattered. Forever yours, Frederick. P.S. Don't let him intimidate you. Don't let him make you doubt. Stand firm. Mr. Castellanos has everything prepared exactly as I instructed. All you have to do is show up and let the truth unfold. The letter slipped from my fingers and fell to my lap. I sat there in Frederick's chair in our empty house and felt something break open in my chest. Not grief this time. Something different. Something that felt almost like hope. Frederick had known. Of course he'd known. He'd seen what I'd refused to see. Acknowledged what I'd spent years denying. And he'd done something about it. I picked up the letter and read it again. Then a third time. Each word sinking deeper, reshaping my understanding of the past 6 months. All those meetings with Mr. Castellanos. All those private phone calls. All those hours Frederick spent in his study. Door closed, papers spread across his desk. He'd been planning this, building something, preparing for a moment he knew would come. Outside, the sun was setting. Soon it would be dark. Tomorrow would be Monday, and the day after that would be Tuesday. I folded Frederick's letter carefully, pressed it against my chest, and whispered to the empty room, I trust you. But trusting Frederick and enduring Trevor were two different things. Monday morning started with text messages. 3 of them before I'd even gotten out of bed. Trevor. Mom, we need to talk about this situation. Trevor. Sienna's father says there are legal ways to expedite the process. Trevor, call me ASAP. I deleted them without responding and made myself breakfast. Oatmeal with blueberries, the way Frederick liked it. I ate at the kitchen table in the same spot where I'd found him 3 days ago and felt nothing but that strange cold clarity. My phone rang. Trevor, I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Sienna, this time voicemail. By noon, I had 6 missed calls and 12 text messages. The tone shifted from insistent to annoyed to borderline threatening. Sienna, Miriam, we're just trying to help you understand the financial complexities. Trevor, Mom, you're not thinking clearly. Sienna, we have a responsibility to protect the family assets. Trevor, Dad would want us to work together on this. That last one almost made me laugh. Frederick wanted a lot of things. Working with Trevor wasn't one of them. At 2 p.m., someone knocked on my door hard, aggressive. I looked through Reyes the peephole and saw Trevor's face flushed and angry. I didn't open it. Mom, he pounded again. I know you're in there. Open up. We need to talk about this. I stepped back from the door and walked to the kitchen, letting him knock, letting him yell, letting him show his true self to the neighbors who were probably watching from behind their curtains. He gave up after 10 minutes. I heard his car start, heard the angry rev of the engine as he sped away. My phone buzzed with another text. You're making a huge mistake. I turned my phone off and spent the rest of the day in Frederick's study, looking through old photo albums. Pictures of Trevor as a baby, as a toddler, as a young boy with grass stains on his knees and gap-toothed smiles. Pictures of us as a family, camping trips, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. When had it changed? When had that sweet boy turned into the man who stood over his father's grave demanding money? I couldn't pinpoint a single moment. It had been gradual, a slow erosion of empathy, of kindness, of basic human decency, like watching a cliff face crumble into the ocean, one piece at a time, until nothing remained but empty air where solid ground used to be. The phone rang again. Trevor, then Sienna, then a number I didn't recognize. Probably Sienna's father. I left the phone off and went to bed early, Frederick's letter tucked under my pillow like a talisman. Tuesday morning arrived cold and gray. I woke at dawn, showered and dressed carefully. Black slacks, a burgundy blouse Frederick had always loved, pearl earrings he'd given me for our 50th anniversary. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked harder than before, older, tired, but she also looked ready. Mr. Castellanos' office sat in a converted Victorian house downtown, all dark wood and stained glass windows. I arrived 15 minutes early and sat in the waiting room, my purse clutched in my lap, my heart beating steady and slow. At exactly 9:57, Trevor and Sienna swept through the door. Sienna wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my car payment. Trevor had on a navy blue suit, his hair perfectly styled, his expression somewhere between confident and smug. They saw me and their faces rearranged themselves into something approximating sympathy. "Mom." Trevor sat down next to me, too close. "Glad you made it. We were worried about you driving alone." No, they weren't. They were worried I wouldn't show up. Worried they'd have to wait even longer to get their hands on what they thought was theirs. Sienna sat on my other side, sandwiching me between them. "Miriam, before we go in, we just want you to know we're here to support you through this difficult process. Whatever decisions need to be made, we'll make them together as a family." Family? That word again, weaponized, hollowed out of all meaning. And at exactly 10 o'clock, Mr. Castellanos' assistant appeared. "He's ready for you." We filed into his office. Mr. Castellano stood behind his desk, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, eyes that had seen everything, understood everything. He'd been Frederick's lawyer for 30 years. He'd been at our wedding anniversary party 2 years ago. He'd held my hand at the funeral and pressed Frederick's letter into my palm. He knew exactly what was about to happen. "Please sit." He gestured to the chairs arranged in front of his desk. Trevor and Sienna took the 2 chairs. I sat in a third chair slightly to the side. Already, unconsciously, we'd arranged ourselves into opposing sides. Mr. Castellanos opened a leather folder and pulled out a thick document. "Frederick's will at the med site." I could see my husband's signature at the bottom of the last page, strong and sure, even in his final months. "First," Mr. Castellano said, his voice formal and measured, "let me express my deepest condolences. Frederick was a good man, a friend. I'll miss him greatly." Sienna shifted impatiently in her chair. Trevor nodded quickly, his eyes fixed on the document. "Now, before we begin the official reading, I need to explain something." Mr. Castellanos looked at each of us in turn. Frederick made several amendments to his will in the months before his death. The final version was completed and signed exactly 3 weeks ago. It supersedes all previous documents. Trevor leaned forward. "What kind of amendments?" "You'll understand shortly. Now, the will begins with standard provisions regarding funeral arrangements which have been completed and organ donation preferences. Moving to the distribution of assets." "The house," Sienna interrupted. "We'd like to discuss the house first. It's a valuable property and there are certain tax implications." "Mrs. Parker." Mr. Castellanos' voice cut through hers like a knife. "Please allow me to read the document as written. There will be time for questions afterward." She pressed her lips together and sat back, but her hand found her phone in her lap. I saw her fingers moving, probably calculating figures before he'd even told us what those figures were. "To my beloved wife, Miriam," Mr. Castellanos read, "I leave the following. Our family home and all its contents. The entirety of my investment portfolio currently valued at $48,300,000. My pension, life insurance policies, and all remaining business interests. Additionally, all vehicles, personal effects, and any assets not specifically designated elsewhere in this document." The room went silent. Absolutely silent. I could hear Sienna's breath catch. Hear Trevor's sharp intake of air. "What about Trevor?" Sienna's voice came out strangled. Mr. Castellanos continued reading as if she hadn't spoken. To my grandchildren, Delilah and Parker and Mason Frederick Parker, I establish an educational trust valued at $2 million. This trust shall be managed by an independent trustee and used solely for educational expenses, tuition, books, housing, and related costs. The trust shall be distributed directly to accredited institutions on behalf of the beneficiaries, and no funds shall be accessible by their parents or guardians for any reason. Trevor's face was turning red. That's it. That's all he left them. I'm not finished. Mr. Castellanos turned a page. To my son Trevor Michael Caldwell. I leave the following items from my personal workshop. 1 socket wrench set, 1 cordless drill, and my collection of automotive manuals. These are the tools I used when I started my first business, working 16-hour days so that my family would never struggle the way I had struggled. The words hung in the air like smoke. Trevor's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Additionally, Mir Castellanos continued, his voice never wavering. I leave to Trevor the sum of $1, single dollar to be paid in cash immediately following this reading. This is insane. Trevor shot to his feet. He can't do this. There are laws. Please sit down, Mr. Caldwell. Mr. Castellanos's voice remained calm. There's more. Trevor sat, but his hands gripped the armrest so hard his knuckles turned white. Sienna's face had drained of all color. Her phone slipped from her lap and clattered to the floor. Neither of them moved to pick it up. Frederick wanted me to read the following statement in his own words. Mr. Castellano said he picked up a separate sheet of paper and began a mate. Trevor, if you're hearing this, I'm dead. And if I know you, which I do, you've spent the days since my funeral calculating my assets, planning how to spend money you assumed would be yours. Treating your mother like an obstacle to be managed rather than a person to be comforted. I hope I'm wrong. I hope you proved me wrong, but I don't think you did. Let me remind you of some numbers, some real numbers, not the ones you've been calculating in your head. $73,000. That's what I spent on your college education. $42,000 your fraternity fees over 4 years. $18,000 your summer in Italy. $35,000 your wedding gift. These aren't rough estimates. I kept records. Every penny I gave you, I wrote down. I wanted to remember. I wanted to be able to look back and feel good about providing for my son. Instead, I look back and see the biggest mistake I ever made. I gave you everything and somehow raised someone I don't even recognize. Someone who measures love in dollars. Someone who called me selfish for not investing in a scheme that would have bankrupted us. Someone who visited his dying father exactly once in 6 months and then only because his wife dragged him along when she needed to see if I'd updated my will. Yes, Trevor. I knew about that visit. I wasn't as senile as you thought. I heard you in the hallway asking your mother about my mental state. I heard Sienna asking if I'd made any changes lately. I heard everything. So, here's what you get. Tools. The same tools I used to build everything from nothing. The same tools that were good enough for me, but never good enough for you. $1. Exactly what your love and loyalty were worth. And before you think about contesting this, before Sienna's father starts making threatening phone calls, know this. I have documentation, recordings, evidence of every conversation, every calculation, every cruel dismissal. I have the voicemail you left when I was in the hospital. The one where you asked your mother to handle the estate paperwork while I was sedated. I have the text messages between you and Sienna planning your investment strategies before I was even cold. Any attempt to contest this will, any legal action whatsoever will result in the immediate public release of all this evidence. Every news outlet, every social media platform, everyone you know, everyone you work for, everyone in Sienna's father's business circle, they'll all see exactly who you are. You wanted my money. You wanted my life's work handed to you like an inheritance you'd earned through birthright alone. Too bad. You got exactly what you deserved, $1. And the knowledge that your mother, the woman you've treated like an inconvenience for years, is now a very wealthy woman who never has to answer your calls again. Think about that every time you look at your children. Think about what kind of father leaves his kids nothing because he was too greedy to love his own father properly. That's your legacy now, Trevor. Not my money, your choices. The silence that followed was absolute, total, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Trevor's face had gone from red to white to gray. He looked like he might be sick. Sienna stared at the floor, her designer handbag clutched in her lap, her perfect composure completely shattered. This is... Trevor's voice came out. He was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. We'll contest it. Will, I wouldn't recommend that. Mr. Castellanos pulled out a second envelope. This one thick and heavy. This contains exactly what Frederick mentioned. Timestamped recordings of phone conversations, text message transcripts, photographs, video footage from the funeral, including audio of Mrs. Parker discussing account access approximately 40 minutes after Frederick's burial. Sienna made a small sound, almost like a whimper. There's also documentation of 3 separate occasions where Mr. Caldwell attempted to visit Frederick in the hospital and was turned away by staff at your request, Mrs. Parker. Frederick knew. He documented everything. And as he stated, any legal challenge to this will result in immediate public disclosure. Trevor stood again, swaying slightly. Mom, you can't let this happen. You know, Dad wasn't himself at the end. We can fix this. We can. I stood too slowly. Every eye in the room turned to me. For 53 years, I'd been quiet, supportive, dutiful. I'd made excuses for Trevor. I'd softened Frederick's criticisms. I'd been the bridge between them, trying desperately to hold together a family that had already fallen apart. Not anymore. Your father, I said, my voice steady and cold, was the most clear-headed man I've ever known. Even at the end, especially at the end, he saw you exactly as you are, and he gave you exactly what you earned. Mom, don't. The word came out sharp. Final. Don't call me that anymore. Mothers are for sons who love them, who show up, who care. You're not my son. You stopped being my son the day you asked when you could access your father's accounts before he was even in the ground. Trevor's mouth closed, opened again. No words came out. I turned to Mr. Castellanos. Is there anything else I need to sign? Just a few final documents. The house transfer, the investment portfolio, the trust management agreements. Let's do it now. I sat back down. Mr. Castellano slid papers across his desk. I read each one carefully. Frederick had taught me that never sign anything without reading it, and added my signature in all the right places. Behind me, I heard Trevor and Sienna whispering urgently. I didn't turn around. Didn't care what they were saying. They could plot and scheme and calculate all they wanted. It wouldn't change anything. When the last signature was done, Mr. Castellanos reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a $1 bill. He slid it across the desk to Trevor. Your inheritance, Mr. Caldwell, as specified by your father's will. Trevor stared at it. The bill sat there on the polished wood, crisp and new, worth exactly nothing compared to what he'd expected. What he'd spent days, probably years, planning to spend. He didn't pick it up. Take it, I said, standing and gathering my purse. It's yours legally. Frederick made sure of it. I walked toward the door. Mr. Castellanos opened it for me. As I stepped through, I heard Sienna's voice high and desperate. Miriam, please think about Delilah and Mason. Think about family. I paused, turned back, looked at them both sitting there in their expensive clothes with their empty hands and emptier souls. I am thinking about Delilah and Mason, I said. That's why their grandfather made sure you can't touch their money. That's why they'll get real education, opportunities you can't leverage or gamble away. He protected them from you. The only family member who needed protecting from was you. I walked out. Mr. Castellanos closed the door behind me with a soft click. The morning air felt cool on my face, clean. I stood on the sidewalk outside the office and breathed it in deep and full like I'd been holding my breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out expecting another desperate message from Trevor. Instead, it was a text from Mr. Castellanos. "Frederick would be proud of you." I smiled. Actually smiled. The first real smile since Frederick died. I drove home slowly, taking the long way, past the park where Frederick and I used to walk on Sunday mornings. Past the diner where we'd had our first date 54 years ago. Past the auto shop where he'd started with nothing but those tools and a dream. Our house looked different now. Not empty, not hollow, just mine. Completely mine. I made myself lunch. Egg salad on wheat bread, the way Frederick liked it. I ate at the kitchen table and thought about the future. About charities I could support. About scholarships I could fund in Frederick's name. About Delilah and Mason growing up knowing their grandfather loved them enough to protect them from their own parents. About Trevor sitting in Mr. Castellanos' office, staring at a single dollar bill and finally understanding what he'd lost. Not money. That was never what mattered. He'd lost something far more valuable. Something Frederick had tried to give him his entire life. Something you can't inherit or invest or calculate in spreadsheets. He'd lost love. Real love. The kind that shows up, that sacrifices, that stays even when there's nothing to gain. And he'd lost it because he'd never valued it in the first place. I finished my sandwich and washed the dishes, including Frederick's coffee mug that had been sitting in the sink for a week. I dried it carefully and put it back in the cabinet where it belonged. Then I went to Frederick's study, sat in his chair, and opened my laptop. I had work to do, foundations to research, lawyers to meet with, a life to build with the gift Frederick had given me. Not just money, freedom. Permission to stop being the bridge between him and Trevor. Permission to stop making excuses, stop hoping, stop sacrificing myself on the altar of maternal love that had never been returned. Permission to finally, after 71 years, choose myself. Outside, the sun was setting. The same sun that had set on every day of my marriage. The same sun that would rise tomorrow on a different life. A life where I was no longer trapped by obligation or guilt or the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, Trevor would wake up one day and remember how to be human. Frederick had freed me, and in doing so, he'd given me something more valuable than $48 million, he'd given me peace. If you've ever sacrificed everything for someone who threw it back in your face. If you've ever been made to feel worthless by the very people who should value you most, your worth was never in their hands. It was always in yours. You just had to be brave enough to see it. To anyone fighting their own battle right now, dealing with family that treats you like an ATM instead of a person, your comeback is already written. Stay quiet, stay strong, and let your actions speak louder than their greed ever could. What lesson hit you hardest from Miriam's story? And if you were in her shoes, would you have done the same thing or handled it differently? I want to hear your thoughts. Don't stop here. Click the next video on your screen right now and watch another powerful story from our channel. These stories matter and your voice matters. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share your answers in the comments below. See you in the next one.